Hi, everybody. Welcome to week 12. This week, I'm going to talk about cultural studies theory. And so this theory is a little bit complicated for a lot of people to understand because it comes from a Marxist or neo-Marxist type of tradition. So if you've had this in other classes, Marxist theory really draws upon the idea that there are haves and have-nots in society. And so, in the US, we have the 1%, the really rich people who actually have most of the money, and then the other 99%, people like myself and all of you, we kind of have to divvy up what's left. And so Marx is really interested in this idea of different social systems, systems of economic relationships, and how it affects culture and society. And so cultural studies theorists and communication have really drawn upon this tradition. So there's like Jürgen Habermas, the Frankfurt School. Many people over the years have really extended this idea of Marxist thought. And so, as you all know, we live in a capitalist society, and there's been many critics of this particular system, particularly in terms of how the rich kind of exploit the middle class and poorer people in society. And so, and a lot of times this is something that you will see in terms of how media systems work in a particular culture, and things like the commodities that we are exposed to through advertising, and this whole system of economic relationships. It's kind of deep to think about in many ways, but what it boils down to is that, when you think about who actually owns the media, it's rich people, right? Even if it's more liberal media, you have people who have a lot of money who own these media systems. So if you think about Facebook, you have a billionaire who owns that system. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, these are all organizations that are controlled by rich people. So cultural studies really looks at how messages and content that we see in the media, including on the internet, is often controlled by people who have a lot of money. And so some of the Marxist concepts that I'm really interested in talking about today, one is the idea of hegemony. And this is the idea that the rich people in society can control the thoughts and behaviors of poorer people or middle-class people through the media. So one idea that you often see that's woven through different genres of entertainment media is the idea of the American dream. And that's the idea that if you work really, really hard, you can make it to that 1%. The problem with that is most people will never be part of the 1%. We work hard all of our lives. Ultimately, we're benefiting the rich people by working very hard. So some people do make it, are very successful if they have an idea that works really well, but most of us are going to stay middle class or poor, unfortunately. And so there's a lot of issues with that. Cultural studies theorists have said, the idea of the American dream, it's ingrained in a lot of our movies and television shows, but ultimately most of us are not going to make it into that 1%. And so there are other ideas as well, like high and low culture in the media. So high culture is associated with the rich. So when you watch something on PBS or something that's more educational about art, literature, and things that people who are more educated and wealthy are concerned about, that's an example of high culture. Low culture is pretty much stuff that is more common, that appeals more to the lower classes or the middle classes. And many people who are cultural studies theorists have argued that, a lot of times this low cultural stuff makes us feel better about ourselves. So if we can watch a show like Jerry Springer, or I've talked a lot in posts last week about the Tiger King documentary that's on Netflix, we see people who are different from us, who may be poor, who may be engaged in outrageous behavior. A lot of times shows like Hell's Kitchen and other things, you have Gordon Ramsay yelling at everybody. This sometimes makes us feel better about ourselves, especially if we see people who are worse off than we are as middle-class individuals. We can say, my life might not be great, but at least it's not as bad as these people that I'm seeing online. And many people have argued that that's a distraction. We entertain ourselves by watching these shows. It makes us feel better about who we are. At the same time, we don't think about our lack of political power sometimes, our economic situation, and therefore, we don't necessarily get out there on the streets and demand that, we have more opportunity to make money and so forth. And so, right now we have, as of today, I think 10 million people are applying for unemployment insurance. And so the COVID-19 pandemic is really going to change the economic structure of society. Many people, because we're in shelter-in-place orders now, are watching shows, binge watching things. Cultural theorists, studies theorists would argue that, this is kind of a distraction. We're not really thinking about what we should be doing, getting out there, trying to prepare for the worst. Instead, we're just kind of, entertaining ourselves, not really thinking about how richer people in society are not going to fare as poorly as we are. So, people would argue that the Donald Trumps and the Steve Mnuchins and other rich people, Zuckerberg and so forth, are not really going to suffer like poor people and middle class people are going to suffer. So one of the things I had for an activity this week is one of the most popular shows right now on Netflix is a show called the Tiger King, which I've talked a lot about. But it really paints a picture of people who live in poor rural places in the United States, particularly Oklahoma, where this show was filmed. And I lived in that state for 11 years. I went to graduate school there and also came back and worked at the University of Oklahoma as a professor, as a faculty member. And I was in a band a lot of the time that I was living there. And I actually played often in a town that was next to Wynnewood, where that documentary is filmed. And it's a very poor area of the country. A lot of people there almost, have a pride, like we may be poor, but we're going to, be outrageous. We're going to do a lot of things, kind of own, being poorer. And so I found it interesting living in that area where there's a whole culture basically of kind of being outrageous. And so when I watched the documentary, I wasn't really surprised at some of the behavior that I saw. I used to actually see people who were much like the people in that documentary. And so, but I do think watching things like that makes us feel better about ourselves. We can say, yes, our situation's dire right now, but at least we're not as bad off as these people. And so I think that's one of the gratifications that we get out of watching something like that. So when you do the activity for this week, think about these issues. Think about issues of class and power in society. Who has the power, who doesn't have the power? How can the media be used, and how can content in the media be used to distract us from things that maybe we should really be thinking about? Also, I think, in the media, we see a lot of messages about our place in the world in the United States. And so the media tends to present us as being number one in the world, and really will show images of other countries and other cultures as maybe being less than or inferior to the United States. When you look at the actual statistics, we have one of the worst healthcare systems in the world. And I think we're seeing the implications of that right now during this pandemic. But we also lag behind many other countries and other metrics as well, like quality of life, well-being, and things like that. And so, but if you watch entertainment media, you would think that America is the place to be. We're the best at everything. And so cultural studies theorists would say, that's a really skewed view of reality. Maybe we shouldn't believe that. Maybe we should question that. And so there's a lot of interesting stuff, even though it's from this, scholarly Marxist perspective. I do think a lot of the points that these theorists make are valid. And we are often distracted by what we see in the media. And so many times we're getting this middle class view of society. And a lot of times people who are in the lower classes are left out of entertainment media. So when you watch, as we talked about with cultivation theory, you tend to see more middle class, more affluent people on TV. And the experiences of people who make less money are not always well documented in the media. And when they are shown, they're presented in ways that actually make them look silly or make them look in a way that helps us to feel better about ourselves. So as you're thinking about the slides and everything this semester or this week and looking through everything, think about these issues. Make sure that you do the readings associated with this week's lecture, because I think it'll provide more background information than I'm able to deliver here. All right, I hope everybody's doing okay given this crisis. It looks like things are going to be really bad over the next few weeks. And so I really hope that everybody makes it through this okay. And so I miss seeing all of you in class, and I look forward to the day when we can all be on campus together. I hope that everything is okay with you and your families. Okay, until next week, have a good rest of the week.